Hello, welcome to this episode of Countercurrents. I'm really pleased to have my friend Pepe Escobar. Pepe is a renowned journalist, one of the hardest working men in the world. And he's just come back both from the Brics summit and was also in Turkey. So we have a lot to discuss. Please stay tuned, hit the like and subscribe button. Will be much appreciated. So I'll go ahead and start the recording. What's the weather like in Paris?
Excellent question, because I'm not going out. I am holed up with my wife here, and we refuse to go out. We go out to buy some stuff, 10 minutes, and we come back home.
It's
nasty out there.
What is the quality of life like in Paris these days? Good, bad, getting worse, getting better?
I would say for 80% of the population is dreadful. Inflation, of course, paranoia, cancel culture. Everything is politicized. You are under total surveillance. Ultra high taxes. People complain all the time. For oligarchs and people close to the financial system is fine.
Yeah,
and of course our friend Pavel Durov from Telegram is living here now. No?
Yeah.
With his oligarch friends, by the way. The guy he called from jail. He had one phone call from jail. Guess who he called? A French oligarch very close to Macron. Xavier Niel, the guy who owns the free internet provider services, one of the shareholders of Le Monde, big tech entrepreneur, Zionist, and close to Macron. Well, I rest my case.
Yeah. Well, the reason I was asking, because my wife and I were in Paris almost 30 years ago now. It was 1996.
This doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. I was doing a presentation at the École Polytechnique on terrorism, and my wife just spent her days walking the city. Fell in love with it.
Of course.
But then we went back about 15 years later, and oh my God, it was it was like more like North Africa. Not that North Africa is bad, but it was not, the distinction between being in Casablanca and being in Paris, they're noticeably different.
Oh, no, it's not. Like you are in suburbs of Dakar. Not even Casablanca is too sophisticated. It's suburbs of Dakar, Dakar. Or suburbs of Bamako in Mali,
So let's start with Brics. Now, I want to focus on one aspect that I think a lot of people may not have picked up on, and it's like what happened when you and I met a year ago in December in person. It's one thing to interact over the internet, one thing to interact in front of a Zoom camera. It's another thing when you actually get people together and they interact face to face and actually develop some bonds of friendship that way. Is that what happened at Brics this time?
Oh, yes, it was, Larry. And it was very, very impressive. I'm still thinking about it and even dreaming about it this past few days. I wrote 2 columns already, one already published, and the other one is probably going out this Wednesday night, Middle East, Russia time, and the third one probably tomorrow. On a human level, and what Xi Jinping calls peoples to peoples exchange, it was outstanding. And even in our cage, which was the gigantic press room, there were like at least 2,000 journalists. It was completely nuts. And it was very hard for us to work. We had access to practically nothing during the whole summit, the 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
the odd press conference from officials and sometimes ministers, but not remotely interesting. So we depended on some of our contacts, of course, and even by email or WhatsApp to talk to them after a few bilaterals or after a few important meetings. Very few actually went to the press room, and we could not leave. We didn't have access to the delegates' rooms because of security. Russia. It can be very complicated. But we could see in the round tables how they were in sync in terms of what they thought would be this roadmap towards the future, the main discussion points. You could see by the body language of many of them that they were perfectly at ease. There were some absolutely striking encounters. I'll give you two examples, and you won't believe it. Xi with Maduro and Putin with Maduro. Maduro was a superstar and especially after it transpired the Brazilian veto for Venezuela to become one of the 13 partners. This went down extremely bad, not only among the other delegates and leaders, but among journalists, of course, and across the sphere. The Chinese didn't like it, the Russians didn't like it, the Iranians didn't like it, because Venezuela had the support of all of them. The Emirates as well, because Venezuela is part of OPEC. So this story of the Brazilian veto, it pains me to say that the stupidity involved is stratospheric. But that's, once again, the Brazilians shooting themselves in the back, and they are specialists on that. Specialists. But Erdogan even smiled. Can you believe it? Something that never happens, He had his bilaterals. He was part of the Brics outreach table. And that, Larry, was, I would say, the highlight of the 3 days was on the the third day. Yeah, the third day in the morning, the Brics outreach session with Putin opening, a very short speech. Then he handed the floor to everybody, and everybody was what? 35 nations, including Palestine, plus international organizations, include the NDB, the BRICS Bank, President Dilma, and Guterres from the UN. That was the real deal. And that I had a Bandung 1955 feeling, and I said, wow, if we compare to Bandung in 1955, which was, this apex of decolonization, and
right.
Let's see where the post-colonial world is going. But this time was different. This time you had superpowers on the table as well. It was a Bandung on steroids, with supported by superpowers across Eurasia, especially. And some of the big powers that are not part of BRICS yet, like Turkey, for instance, and the Central Asians. And this was more or less simultaneously with the announcement of the new BRICS partners, 13 of them, where you find the compositions is fascinating. 4 Southeast Asian powerhouses, including 2 Islamic majority countries, Malaysia and Indonesia. Very, very important. And Vietnam and Thailand, 4 powerhouses of the 21st century. 2 Central Asians, the two top Central Asians, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Turkey, of course, NATO member. 3 Africans, Algeria, Nigeria, and the third one, Uganda, of course. And 2 Latin Americans, but not Venezuela. Bolivia, for obvious, I would say, lithium reasons, and gas as well. And Cuba, which was a way of BRICS as a whole paying tribute to Cuba and finally taking Cuba of their isolation imposed by
right.
as you know very well, for 7 decades now?
Yeah.
So that was great. And of course, the political capital of Cuba among all the delegates is enormous, like Palestine, which, of course, they discussed. in the Brics outreach session. Mahmoud Abbas was there representing Palestine. So when you see all that in front of you in the same table for 3.5 hours, wow, it's extremely impressive. And Putin as the MC, faultless, absolutely faultless. You could see that after the end of the Maduro speech, it was incredible. He praised Maduro as the successor of Chavez, pronouncing Chavez's name in Spanish faultlessly, which proves that Putin is also a very good Spanish speaker, and he understands the history of modern Venezuela as well. So all that was it was the most important takeaway, I would say, apart from the Kazan declaration is very complicated, but it's more like a manifesto. If you read, it takes you, I would say, a few hours at least to read at least twice the declaration and see where they're getting at. It's basically a manifesto saying, look, we're not against you, but all of this needs reform. And then there's the list of everything, including UN, G20, IMF, Bretton Woods institutions, you name it. It's not antagonistic, on the contrary. And even with a text like that, which they're going to send to the UN Security Council, by the way, I think the Americans are going to read this and obviously dismiss it.
Right.
I would like your opinion on that, by the way, in fact. And if you had a chance to take a look at the declaration.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through it yet. But what is up with Brazil? Why it's almost as if Brazil is trying to sabotage Brics, and particularly with them having the presidency this next year. How can they be trusted to continue the momentum forward?
They're not, and it pains me to admit it. There are many reasons for the veto. First one, which I think it's the most important of them all, is that this current Brazilian government led by Lula is not sovereign. It's essentially remote controlled by the Democrats in the US, not by Washington as a whole, but by the Democrats in the US. Let's see what happens if the Democrats lose next week. I wonder what's going to happen to, because the tables of the law that were presented to Lula by Jake Sullivan after Lula was elected. Let's see what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, there is and this I learned from my well-informed Brazilian friends, academics, scholars, diplomats, etc. A gigantic anti-Brics lobby at the level of some of the top ministries like the foreign ministry and the finance ministry, comprador elites as usual, Congress, which is controlled by comprador elites, agribusiness, pro, let's say, imperial interests or Wall Street interests, right? And the fact that the Workers' Party and the people around Lula, they have absolutely no clue about, number one, Brics as a whole and how Brics is working. What happened this year under the Russian presidency here? I say here until 3 days ago, here in Moscow, which is something that I had the privilege to accompany very closely since last year. You remember when we had our meeting with Sergei Ryabkov in Moscow?
Right.
I have been following Brics literally week after week, as closely as possible, even when I'm not in Russia. And I had the chance to talk to a lot of Sherpas, people from the business council, people from the working groups, people from the Russian rating agency, you name it. And they were always briefing me on the internal difficulties, of course, and the deliberations, the positive points, but also the enormous problems and challenges. And they were always touching on a very sensitive point. The Brazilians, our impression is that they are not taking this thing seriously. And they were not in the end. And the confirmation was, okay, if Lula fell on the floor and hit his head, that's immaterial. The timing was perfect because he had an excuse to present not only to the Brazilians, but to especially to his partners at Brics, why he couldn't come. He talked by Zoom in the main number, the number one BRICS table, the 9 BRICS. It was a pro forma speech, in fact, but this went down terribly badly for Brazil, and in terms of Brazil trying to pose itself as one of the leaders of the global South, wow! Now it's Sisyphus, to get back the respect among Africans, among the BRICS family as a whole, is going to be very, very hard. And they and during throughout this year, they were saying that their priority was the G20. G20 is next week. I'm sorry, next month in Rio. So we are three weeks roughly away from the G20, and the G20, as we know, is and will be hijacked by the G7. So that's Brazil basically aligning with the G7 instead of BRICS. It's an extremely sorry affair, and I was extremely personally depressed by the whole thing.
Yeah,
not unexpected, of course. Some of the very good analysts I talked to, they were appalled by it. In fact, including Latin Americans, Lebanese, the Africans, unanimously, So we wonder what's going to happen next year. It doesn't look good, and so that leads us to something that the Russians were saying very diplomatically, of course, that they did all the heavy lifting this year, trying to get all the major dossiers on track because they know the next year not much is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think has BRICS, the other principles, figured out a way to dump someone like Brazil if they become disruptive?
No, that would be a little too harsh, Larry. But Brazil could be, I would say, relatively marginalized. In fact, the 3 top BRICS, they got way more solid this past 3 days in Kazan. Mm-hmm. The famous Primakov triangle, Russia, China, and India. So, In fact, I wrote in my column that this is the return of the Primakov triangle. No question about that. And now it's a quartet with Iran, because Iran has fabulous relations with the top 3. And this was clear in every time that Putin was mentioning connectivity corridors, geoeconomics, he was referring to the North-South Transportation Corridor, which is Russia, Iran, and India. Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say what makes BRICS so formidable, I believe, is they are resource rich. The countries that comprise sort of the center of it, they're not resource poor like Europe. Mm-hmm. Resource rich, and going forward, that gives them even more power.
Absolutely correct, and no wonder that it was fast. I was always paying very close attention to what Putin is going to talk practically about geoeconomics, and he said something. There were some snippets here and there that were fascinating. He actually named the top 2 drivers of economic growth for the next few years. He named them Southeast Asia and Africa. Mm-hmm. And that translates into what? 4 new partners for BRICS from Southeast Asia and 3 from Africa. Perfect. He also named the top 2 connectivity corridors of the next few years, which need to be developed, and BRICS as a whole, they should invest on it as well. The Northern Sea route, as the Russians call it, the Chinese call it Arctic Silk Road, which I think is much more it's more romantic, but in a Chinese way is even more precise. In fact, it is an Arctic Silk Road through the Arctic, no question. And the North-South Transportation Corridor, which interests a lot of players across Eurasia. It interests Turkey, the Caucasus, the Central Asians, of course, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Everybody's interested in this corridor and it's fascinating because we see a lot of horizontal corridors across Eurasia, right? Including the maritime corridors, the Arctic on the north and the maritime Silk Road in the south through the Indian Ocean. And then you see a north-south corridor, literally, from St. Petersburg, crossing the Caspian, going to the Persian Gulf, and then turning left and going through the Indian Ocean all the way to Mumbai. So this is another thing that the BRICS are doing in connection with other multilateral organizations, investing in connectivity corridors. So in a sense, BRICS is basically a trans-Eurasia or pan-Eurasia cooperation organization with Africa as well. And then we could call it Afro-Eurasia, which is a denomination that I think is very apt for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And then there are far away Latin America, unfortunately, because of distance, culture, internal problems, internal squabbling, Monroe Doctrine, of course, Argentina that fell on the U.S. lap, and now we're going to have a NATO base in Tierra del Fuego one day or another. You know,
yeah,
you know,
que locura, well, que locura, what crazy.
Que locura. Exactly. But at least they managed to get, and this was total consensus, Cuba and Bolivia. Great. And Venezuela, like I told you, it was a consensus, and Brazil broke it with the veto. And there were, and there are, and there will be serious discussions about the veto mechanism on BRICS. Maybe, I wouldn't say short term, but perhaps after the Brazilian presidency, they can come up with an absolute majority. Mm-hmm. Because this will unblock a lot of very complicated dossiers. If they have they establish an absolute majority with numbers, even, will be much easier. Consensus on everything is going to be very hard. It's going to be very slow.
Well, you know, one of the things that fascinated me, even though BRICS is ostensibly an economic organization, you know, trade, it proved to be offer some hope to be more effective as a geopolitical organization too than the UN, by virtue of, you know, India and China resolving their border dispute. What happened with Azerbaijan and Armenia? Those two guys sitting next to each other, not throwing punches. You know, what was driving that? Was that Putin?
Yes. To answer part of your question directly, Larry, the mediator between Modi and Xi to sit down, I wouldn't say sit down, but over the phone, weeks ago, decide to let's solve the Ladakh Himalaya problem. Finally. And that was great. That was Putin's mediation, personal Putin mediation. And the fact that they announced at the start of the summit, it was brilliant, because the decision was taken weeks ago, if not 2 or 3 months ago. And they picked the day the summit opens in Kazan to announce that, yes, we are discussing and we're going to solve this problem in the next few days. That was a masterpiece. Absolutely. And this was BRICS diplomacy in action, which is something that they can apply. For instance, another very complicated dossier, Saudi Arabia. Nobody could give a definitive answer of, okay, what's the status of Saudi Arabia? Are they in, out, or in the fence? They are in the fence as well. And they didn't say anything about it. They sent the foreign minister. The foreign minister was sitting during this BRICS outreach session. He spoke, etc. But they didn't say anything about Saudi status. Everybody is suspecting that there will be a decision after the American elections. It could be next month, could be before the end of December, could be before the beginning of the Brazilian presidency, hopefully. And they will say yes. And also the mediator in all that is Putin, because Putin is facilitating dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran on many issues, including Yemen.
Right.
Very, very, very tricky, because the proxy war in Yemen and, in fact, the direct Riyadh war against Yemen, for the moment, we have a ceasefire that holds somewhat. But we need some sort of definition of Saudi Arabia. Okay, what do you want from Yemen? Are you ready to discuss with the government in Sana'a, for instance, instead of that Potemkin government in a hotel in Riyadh, that passes for the government of Yemen.
Right.
So once again, Putin and Brics as a whole can be the mediator in all that. And there's another problem. Egypt and Ethiopia, because of a dam in the Nile, big problem between Egypt and Ethiopia. Brics can facilitate a solution. So they are working diplomatically heavily about it. For instance, if Venezuela was admitted as a Brics partner, Brazil and Venezuela could settle down their differences with Brics mediating. Would be very, very simple. Not even that satisfied these people in charge of Brazilian foreign policy. I prefer not to name them. I know them. I prefer not to name them. And they are totally aligned with the G20, G7 agenda, in fact.
Yeah, of course, you wonder at what point the realization is going to dawn of how, what I'll call the growing irrelevancy of the G7 in particular.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like it's a shrinking. It's becoming a midget. Or it's like that movie that featured Brad Pitt, where he was born as a old man and then grew younger throughout the thing. But in this case, here we see the G7 starting as this behemoth, shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, still believing that it's the biggest guy on the street.
You're right. And for instance, they believe that next month's G20, they will prevail. In fact, they hijacked the agenda completely. And the Brazilians, meekly accepted it. That's one of the reasons, for instance, Putin could have made an effort to go to the G20, and it's a waste of time. So probably Lavrov will go. Xi Jinping is only going, this is very important, because of what comes afterwards. The APEC summit in Peru, where he's going to inaugurate that amazing port, Shanghai, that they're building to link with Shanghai.
Oh, okay.
This is going to be the southern Pacific maritime Silk Road from Peru to China. This is what matters for China. They know that the G20 in Rio, apart from the natural beauty of Rio, it's absolute nonsense.
Yeah. That's tough to get to there. I know in the past, Cologne, Panama has played such a central economic hub for the region because that's where, all the products out of China, Vietnam, Malaysia, they would flood in there, and then all the buyers from South America would come up into Cologne, buy it, and then it would get distributed out through South America.
Yes.
They did have I know that Chile has that free trade zone, Iquique, which has become, I think, a little more important in the last few years.
Absolutely. But a port of this dimension this is a game changer.
Yeah, to be that big.
So the amount of stuff that they can start shipping from this port, Shanghai, is enormous, and that interests the immensely powerful Brazilian agribusiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's going to be much easier for them to, send everything by truck to Shanghai. And there you go. They save days, and it's going to be much cheaper to send from the Pacific instead of sending from the Brazilian ports in the South Atlantic.
Yeah.
It's forever to get to Asia, right?
Well, let's look at some of how some upcoming international events. What do you think the effects will be on Brics? So, Ukraine, Russia finishes conquering Ukraine. Ukraine surrenders. Any effect on Brics?
It's a good question because they discussed this a lot in Kazan, including the bilaterals, and including the bilaterals with the big guys as well. There were mentions during the main session, the first day, the 9 of them, right? And during Putin's press conference, which unfortunately we didn't have, I think he spent 1 hour answering questions, which For his standards, is nothing. And but he excused himself, saying, "Look, I still have 5 bilaterals." It was an absolutely crazy day. I think he woke up probably at 3 a.m. to start going through the whole thing. But once again, he said the same thing. We are open to any initiative. We are open to the Brazil-China plan. We are open to Turkey is trying to sell us as a peace plan. But the problem is everything that is presented is immediately or a few hours later is rejected by Kiev. He didn't even mention America. He mentioned that illegal thing sitting at the throne in Kiev, exactly. And everybody wants to get rid of him, but there are no substitutes, right? The thing is, after this winter, assuming they survive the winter, the situation for the Ukrainian armed forces is going to be a major disaster.
Well, yeah, in fact, it already is.
It already is, but after 3 or 4 months, Larry, wow.
Yeah.
Then that's it. There's going to be practically nothing left. And in terms of the Russian advance, it's gonna be not Steppenwolf. No, it's gonna be a zillion Steppenwolves because they can move west in the empty steppes anywhere they want, literally. And this is going to start happening soon.
Well, in fact, Zelensky was out whining today in public about he had this secret protocol in his piss plan, as he called it, and. Yeah, he said it. I didn't. I was just repeating what he said.
Okay, you're faulting.
But the secret codicil of basically, hey, give us Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Tomahawk cruise missiles.
So
exactly.
The Biden administration leaked that out and basically said, yes, there are 2 ways that we could give Ukraine Tomahawk cruise missiles. No way and no way in hell.
Well, that was very precise.
Yeah. So Zelensky's like, hey, man, you leaked my secret plan. Very, very upset by it. And that comes on top of, what was it, yesterday or the day before, he was blasting India. I mean, this guy seems to wake up in the morning and say, he's like a Ukrainian version of Israel.
Mm.
Who can I piss off today? Who can I alienate today?
But the problem, Larry, is that he's not even the main character in this whole tragedy, which it doesn't even qualify as Shakespeare, because Shakespeare, at least the literature was fantastic. This is a crappy tragedy, no? And he's not even the main character, and he still believes that he is the center of attention.
Yeah.
So it is tragic in this sense, but it's more tawdry and ultra cheap and trashy than anything else, the whole thing. His disappearing from the picture is a matter of, could be a matter of weeks instead of a few months.
No, I agree.
But replace him with what?
Well, I think Zaluzhny right now is...
Again.
Yeah, he's popping back up as, and he's not great, but at least he's made comments in public about, hey, Ukraine, we may need to concede land, make concessions to Russia on land in order to get this thing settled.
Well, the Brits who learned a few things about stealing lands, the British press now, this is front page material.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Can you imagine 2 or 3 months ago, something like this, out of the question. Now they're starting to see the light a little bit. But still, everything hinges on next week, no? On what's going to happen.
Yeah. It seems that when Russia consolidates its victory and the negotiations are underway to settle whether or not Ukraine will continue to even exist as a country. In those negotiations with the West, from a Brics standpoint, you're seeing both Russia and China as having been targets of sanctions, especially by the Europeans and the United, in addition to the United States. So I would see one possible consequence of bringing this war to an end is that Russia, and acting on behalf of China in this regard, would insist that these sanctions, hey, you got to stop with the sanctions, lift those, and then we can have normal relationships. Otherwise, we're not going to make any kind of we're going to take what we want. We're not going to make concessions. What do you think about that?
In fact, Larry, this is what everybody in a solid position of power in Moscow is saying. It's even the foreign ministry. Putin said explicitly that sanctions should be lifted. At the same time, the Russians have no illusions that these sanctions will stay.
Mm-hmm.
From the Americans, from the European Union, led by those batshit crazes in Brussels, it will stay. There's no question. They have independent sanctions compared to the US as well. So they have no illusions. So it comes back to the same point. Okay, decided on the battlefield, our timeline, and we stop when we want to stop. That's it.
Yeah.
If you want to sit down and discuss terms, no problem. We are open to this. Start discussing now. But our conditions. All the red lines for us. And, of course, end of sanctions and return of our stolen assets, which, by the way, also is not going to happen. Did you see what those batshit crazes approved a few days ago? That package of $50 billion.
Right.
20 billion of these 50 billion will be financed by proceeds from the stolen Russian assets. And the Russians already said, okay, excellent. You have a lot of European companies here. We're going to confiscate all of them. And it's going to be much more than 20 billion. Much. Yeah. People are always telling us in Moscow that basically everybody's still there, Larry. Everybody's still doing business with Russia via Turkey, via Kazakhstan, via Georgia, you name it. But, European companies, and we're not going to lose this market. No way. So they found ways to still be present and you find every European product that you want in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Anything,
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed substantially. It's obviously much more expensive, but it hasn't changed substantially.
But think back to December 2021.
Yes.
That I think the mindset even in Russia at the time was, God, we can't live without the West. That our economic future, our economic growth is tied into the West.
Exactly.
Now, 3 years later, I'd argue that it's changed 180 degrees. That Russia now is like, we don't need them. We're free of them. I think they finally come to the realization, hey, we've shaken off the chains. We're free, and this Brics environment now, trading with China, trading with India, trading even with Brazil, trading with these other countries, with Iran, has been free. They're not confined. What do you think of that?
Absolutely correct, Larry, because this is what, many of the Africans who were in Kazan, they were saying exactly that. They were fascinated by the way the whole Russian apparatus fought the tsunami of sanctions and being expelled from SWIFT. Right. They were fascinated. Said, teach us, tell us how you do it. Of course, it's different because we're talking about a nuclear hypersonic power.
Yeah, it was.
But some things, of course, Africans or Central Asians, Cuba or Venezuela, they can learn from the Russians. But it was interesting that Elvira Nabiulina was in all the major meetings, Larry. And usually in Elvira Nabiulina, she doesn't go to geopolitical meetings, only Russia Central Bank related meetings. This time she was in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that afterwards, a lot of delegates were, okay, can we go aside and you explain to us how you did it?
Well, the whole SWIFT thing, I think a lot of folks don't understand what SWIFT really is or was.
Yeah, true.
So basically, it's a banking email system where banks would email each other And that email became the means for sending money from one institution to another, or have credits show up and debits show up on the other side's balance. And what the idiots in Washington failed to appreciate, that was when they cut that off, when they shut Russia out of it, they cut off a supply of intelligence, because the U.S., through the National Security Agency, was monitoring all those transactions, was actually able to intercept them all. So you could actually see where the money was going from point A to point B.
Where it was coming from, who was sending it, and where it was going. This is priceless intel, right?
Yeah. So now they said, hey, let's just poke out our eyes. And now whatever Russia's doing, we don't have a clue.
You're right. In fact, one of the Russians of one of the working groups, he said that SWIFT, the SWIFT system is very primitive.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that they are discussing, they prefer to call it in terms of, we are discussing different models, and then we present these models to the Brics leaders, and they have to decide, obviously, once again by consensus, to implement these models. And during the summit, I think it was right at the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, HSBC announced that they're going to start using the Chinese messaging system.
Mm-hmm.
So can you imagine a mega global bank like HSBC? They decided, okay, we don't need to use SWIFT all the time. For many of our transactions, we use this Chinese system. It's called CHIPS, the acronym, which is similar to the Russian SPFS system. And the Iranians have also a similar one. So this is already the embryo of a BRICS system. You get the Russian, the Iranian, and the Chinese system. You merge them, you expand to other BRICS, and you have an alternative SWIFT.
Well, in fact,
something that they're thinking about.
Well, and of the top 10, the biggest banks in the world, if I recall, 6 of the 10 are Chinese, right? Something like that.
6 of the exact Bank of China and ICBC are the top ones. Yeah.
So that gets us back to what I call, is known as the golden rule. Those with the gold get to make the rules.
But this is the golden rule.
Yeah. So, okay, well, then let's another international development that I think will directly impact BRICS, and where BRICS may actually have some more influence than is being accepted. The Israeli-Iranian war. Let's call it what it is. I was hopeful Friday night, as the attack was winding down, that Iran was going to take the win and not, because they did effectively defeat the Israeli attack, despite all the
practically everything, right?
Yeah. Despite Israel's claim, oh yeah, man, we destroyed we had 600 they go on and on about all the great things they did, and it find out no, that didn't really happen. But the indications are now that Iran's going to retaliate, and when they hit back this time, unlike the October 1st strike, it's going to be designed to cause damage and to inflict some pain on Israel. In light of the fact that Iran's now a new member of BRICS and has had close military relations with both Russia and China, and is signing that defense agreement with Russia, are there any other potential geopolitical roles that BRICS can play in this conflict?
Well, in fact, when Israel is attacking Iran now, Israel is attacking BRICS. This in itself already changes the whole equation, right?
Right.
And now in the next few days, in fact, Pezeshkian will go to Moscow to sign the comprehensive strategic partnership with Putin personally. And that is, as we all know, and it has been going on since last year, is military cooperation as well. And of course, top of the line Russian hardware is in Iran for months, including the defense of Iran against this latest Israeli attack.
Yeah, the S-400 systems, electronic warfare systems. Exactly. Yeah.
And the Murmansk scrambler. right? Which they sent apparently 2 months ago or so, So we assume that Israelis know about all this. But still, because these are political decisions, not military decisions, and the people who decide are those Talmudic cycles in the war cabinet in Tel Aviv, they'll keep ramping up, non-stop.
Now, there is some interesting news stories coming out today that apparently the top generals in the Israeli Defense Force are basically saying, hey, okay, we've achieved everything we can achieve. We now need to figure out how to get a negotiated settlement. And one of them was even quoted as saying, we're going to have to make some painful concessions. Now, that confirms what I've been saying all along, that this is a war that Israel's losing.
Exactly.
Because, man, if you're winning the fight, you're not saying, hey, can we get a rest period here?
Discuss terms.
Yeah, I want to. Can you give me a stop punching me? It hurts.
Well, it's crazy because it's an absolutely demented killing machine.
Yeah.
This is what we have been doing this past few months, and especially these past 2 months, including Lebanon. They killed everybody in Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is still there, swinging.
Right.
And the new leader, Kazan, this guy is very tough, Larry. We met him in, if I'm not mistaken, we met him in Tehran a few years ago when he was part of the Hezbollah Politburo, let's put it this way. Extremely respected, including by Ayatollah Khamenei in person as well. Mm-hmm. Was very respected by Soleimani as well. He's very, very tough. And he's an intellect. He's not a warrior. He's an intellectual, essentially. But he's very, very tough. Wow. And it proves to us that Hezbollah is, in terms of an organism that regenerates itself, it's matchless. All these commanders, third rank commanders, fourth rank commanders, now they are all in the front line.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, some of them are actually joking. I saw something today and said, okay, so when do you plan to get to the Litani River exactly?
Yeah.
Because the Israelis have advanced a few meters in southern Lebanon. It's 50 kilometers to the Litani River. They'll never get there.
No. They keep getting ambushed. They keep ambushed. The terrain doesn't favor them, and they learn nothing from 2006.
No, absolutely. But how can we explain that? The only way we can explain that is a mix of hubris and a gigantic superiority complex.
Oh yeah, I call it it's a toxic mixture of arrogance and ignorance.
Exactly.
No,
another lesson on the battlefield for them.
Well, it looks like Brics actually, I would argue, has some potential leverage over Israel in the field of oil, because really Brics is sort of like a shadow organization of OPEC in part.
True.
Given the only major oil producer that's not in there apart from the United States is Nigeria. Everybody else that's a big player in the oil market seems to have some association or relationship with Brics. And Israel's primary source of oil right now is coming out of Azerbaijan through Turkey, correct?
The BTC, this is a story that I followed, Larry, including renting a Jeep in Baku to run parallel to the BTC. And I was stopped by the BTC police. Basically, they told me, you have no right. I say, this is a public road. I am in a Jeep in a public road, side by side with your pipeline. No, we run the whole thing.
Huh?
This tells you that the people who actually run Azerbaijan is British Petroleum.
Mm-hmm.
You see? But okay, this was years ago. I'm sure it hasn't changed. So this is the BTC pipeline, Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan. When it gets to Ceyhan, it goes by oil cargoes to Israel. 40% of Israel's oil goes through the BTC. So that's the number one question everyone poses to Erdogan. Of course, we cannot pose it directly. When are you going to turn off the tap?
Yeah.
And he hasn't done it.
Yeah, because if he turned that off, Israel won't be able to continue to fight.
Absolutely. And of course, Israel buys from Kazakhstan as well, which is much more complicated because it's on the other side of the Caspian. But we have one Caucasus and one Central Asian player, one of them now a Brics partner, which could make a lot of, and Turkey, of course, which is also now a Brics partner. They are all involved in supplying oil to Israel, and they could do something to stop it. And for the moment, nothing. And I'm sure this, obviously, we don't have smoking guns, but this had to have been discussed in the bilaterals and in the number one BRICS meeting when we had the BRICS 9 only on the table.
But yeah, when you consider this is an action that can be taken that can limit the killing.
They can limit the killing, exactly.
Yeah,
and stop the killing machine on its tracks, exactly. But this brings us, Larry, to that's major the Achilles heel of BRICS, internal contradictions. And some of the Sherpas were always coming back to it. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass because we have to deal not only with the contradictions at the table, but their their domestic problems and their insecurity, many of these governments. And when we have the 13 partners coming in, this is going to be even more complicated, So, I was trying to come up with an image to tell everyone what BRICS really is. And I think I found it. It's a lab, essentially. It's not a revolutionary movement because they don't have a common ideology. It's a multilateral organization, but it aims to be much more than a multilateral organization in practice. Now, but it's a lab. And this is, after you hear many of these scenarios that the working groups, business councils, that they're trying. I was hearing the word model over and over again. So, but that's it. It's a lab. They are trying models. They need test drives. They need test runs. And when they see that the thing works, it gets to the leader level for approval. And that's why they did not approve anything immensely substantial on the finance economic front during Kazan. But there's a lot of stuff on the way. They approved a clearance system, which is already very important. They approved a reinsurance system as well, which is very important. They approved, let's keep developing mechanisms with BRICS, Bridge and BRICS Pay. Remember BRICS Pay when they showed that little card 1 week before Kazan? We could get to this relatively quickly. I would say before the next summit next year, you can have a major test drive of BRICS Pay among the BRICS members. The thing is, where is the money going to come from for that? It has to come from the members. Or it could be organized by the NDB, the BRICS Bank. And BRICS Bridge, something incredible happened, Larry, which I only managed to confirm this morning. BRICS Bridge is based on the system called M-Bridge, which is, it came from the Bank of International Settlements originally in Switzerland. It has as, I wouldn't say contributors, but maybe like observers or participants, the IMF and the European Central Bank. You know what they're going to do? You know what they're mulling? You know that maybe it's going to happen. They want to cancel M-Bridge. You know why? Because they heard about BRICS Bridge, which is an improvement on M-Bridge. And they said, oh, now Putin wants to use our idea. He's stealing our idea. No, this is something that the BRICS have been discussing for 1 year at least.
Yeah.
We need an alternative. So they examine mBridge. They liked the idea, especially because some of the BRICS members and partners are part of mBridge. mBridge has China, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Thais, the UAE, and there's another one. China, yes, and China from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia joined a few months ago. So these are BRICS or BRICS partners, and they're using it, they're testing it, and they like it. So this could be an embryo for BRICS Bridge. And I'm sure the guys in the working groups of BRICS Bridge will say, okay, let's use this model. We amplify it. We start with the 9 BRICS, and then we expand to the partners as well. So soon you can have 22 nations using BRICS Bridge.
Wait, the one.
No wonder the Western financial system, they're freaking out, because this is a bypass SWIFT operation completely.
Well, the other thing that struck me is that in the contrast with the United Nations, with the post-World War II international order, is that, let's call it the egalitarian nature, the true egalitarian nature of BRICS.
Yes.
So even though Russia, China, and India are these dominant economic, military, industrial powers, they didn't build the system so that they would be able to veto, just like, when you look at the UN Security Council in particular, here you've got these legacy colonialists, the United Kingdom and France having veto power in the Security Council, where because economically, militarily, they're irrelevant. They're not they're not significant in any way, other than Britain continued to try to be a financial hub. But what you see with BRICS is that there was this genuine. You can't fake this, where you treat people. You don't sit and look at them and say, "Oh, how much money? What's your net worth?" If you're high net worth, then I'm going to be nice to you. If you're low net worth, then I'm going to treat you like a servant. You didn't get that vibe. It was just the opposite. It was like, "Hey, welcome to our house. You're a guest."
Exactly. And this was visible in the bilaterals, in the body language, in the BRICS out, especially the BRICS outreach session, at night in the gala dinners as well. It's fascinating. It's something that you never see on G20, right, on G7, or on these mega meetings that you usually see in Europe or the US. The fact that everybody on the table has a voice and is respected. If it's Cuba, Palestine, or China speaking, everybody is respected at the same level.
Yeah.
Of course, this creates enormous logistical problems, of course, and something that they're always saying, this is not an anti-Western group. It's a non-Western group, essentially non-Western group, because if you take Latin America, these are part of the State Department terminology, Western Hemisphere. So they are part of the West. Brazil is part of the West. Brazil is not in Asia. So, but it's essentially a non-Western, majority non-Western club. And what is fascinating is the presence of Islam on BRICS.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I was struck the minute I went to the RT studio, which was in front of the Kazan Kremlin, with the view was absolutely mind-boggling. And then I looked at that and I said, wow, these people are very clever. They are directly appealing to 2 billion Muslims with one image. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's all one image, And now that we see at the same time these two processes, and they are in parallel. A lot of the lands of Islam are BRICS members and partners, and one of the top multilateral organizations all across Asia is BRICS. So BRICS is encompassing Islam and Asia at the same time.
Yeah.
Not to mention Africa. Africa now we're going to have, between members and partners, we're going to have 6 It's huge. And the waiting list in Africa is mind-boggling. Everybody in Africa wants to be part of it. And the foreign minister was being very conservative. They said, we have 34 members. Wait, no, now it's more than 40. And next year is going to be 50.
Yeah.
Or even more. So it is really global in this sense. And the fact that they picked a city where it's not a Muslim majority city. This is something that I learned from friends I made in Kazan this year. I didn't know that, for instance, and many foreigners didn't. Kazan is 53% Muslim Tatar, and the rest Orthodox Christians. Mm-hmm. So it's half and half. And they live in perfect harmony in a city with brand new infrastructure, which is extremely impressive. The Africans, especially, they were gobsmacked when they saw Kazan, where everything works impeccable: public transportation, metro, the access to the airport and to the venue, the summit venue, you name it. Beautiful shops, wonderful restaurants, everything. And wow. And they see at the same time that this is part of the lens of Islam as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very clever from the Russian presidency to, instead of holding it in St. Petersburg and Moscow, the staples, right? In Kazan, because Kazan has an extra dimension of contact with the global South. So you see that they think about all these details carefully. They stage something carefully. They discuss a lot carefully. So when they launch something, it's very, very serious. And that's why I would say this goes against a lot of people who are, including very good analysts. They didn't decide anything substantial in Kazan. Whoa.
Right.
They could not. They had to present to the new members and to the partners, look, these are the roadmaps we're working on, especially the de-dollarization roadmap, which is so many different levels. So you read about this in the Kazan Declaration, you read about it in the white papers that, soon we're going to have a definitive organization of how Brics Pay and Brics Bridge is going to work. And then another one, Brics Clear and Brics Reinsurance is almost ready. And then they say, look, we are also examining the possibility of using a stable coin with gold and currencies of Brics members together for international cross-border transactions. But it's not ready yet. It's a model. Mm-hmm. And it has to be approved by the leaders. But you see that everything is going in the same direction, Well, so it is really a lab, a work in progress in a giant lab.
So let me leave you with this question, because we've been going over an hour now, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
How long can the United States and Europe continue to ignore or pretend that Brics doesn't exist?
Excellent question, Larry, because did you notice the amount of irritation in the West?
Oh, yeah.
They were angry and they were pissed that this was a major success.
Or they tried to pretend that it did, it wasn't going on. We're just going to ignore that.
We're just going to, exactly. Or I would say 90% of the headlines, Putin's club, Putin's meeting of autocrats, putting this, putting that. They don't even put Brics on, because the headline here is Brics. In terms of journalism, you have to put Brics on the headline because this is what it's all about, right? Yeah. No, they thought that Putin, when they woke up, I'm going to try to, arrange all the friends I can get and bring them to Kazan and throw a party. It's a joke.
Yeah.
And you saw very, very few in-depth analysis of what Brics is trying to do, actually. The Financial Times attempted a little bit. The Economist did not even attempt it. Washington Post and New York Times was really a joke.
Wall Street Journal, either. They ignored it.
Exactly. Wall Street Journal, no, practically. No. I met one of the New York Times correspondents, a young lady, very well-intentioned, but she obviously didn't have the experience to be covering something so complex, And we even tried to help her, a few of us, literally, explaining to her how Brics works. She had no clue.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, we'll stay on top of this, and I'll be back to you as you continue your adventures. How much longer are you going to be resting and recuperating in Paris?
Well, I'm going to South Africa soon. December, Italy, and in January, I'm back in Russia.
Oh, good time. Good time. It'll be nice and warm then, right?
Exactly. Minus 25.
All right, my friend. Hey, listen, thanks for taking the time. It's always
always an enormous pleasure, of course.
But I prefer that we're together eating while we're chatting.
By the way, if you come to Russia in late January, early February, there's going to be an event over there. I'm sure they're going to invite you.
Oh, cool. I hope that's the case. Maybe we'll see you then.
Exactly. See you then. Cheers.
All right, my friend. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Countercurrents was designed to give you some better insights into the meaning of Brics and what Brics will mean, not just economically, but also for the geopolitical future of the world. Please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. I'm Larry Johnson.